Good afternoon. I'm going to apologize from the start. I'm really losing my voice pretty rapidly, so I'll do my best to project. But hello, I'm Sydney Jessup. I am a classical civilizations major and English minor in the College of Arts and Sciences here at BU. And the topic of my presentation today is the remarkably important extinction of an ancient herb called Silphium. My research operates under a number of different disciplines, including classical literature, archaeobotany, archaeology, and conservation studies. And I do want to take a moment before I dive into the heart of my project to thank my advisor, Dr. John Marston. He's at an event this weekend and wasn't able to join us today, but I am so grateful for all of his help and guidance. This project could not have happened without him. So I want to start here by situating us in the middle of the current conservation conversation. Right now, based on ongoing research, there's a whopping 26,276 plant species currently at risk of extinction. But this issue isn't just confined to the modern day. In fact, human beings have experienced and, frankly, expedited the extinction of plant species for centuries. And that brings us to one of the earliest and best documented cases from Antiquity, the subject of my presentation today, Silphium. So my research has four major guiding questions. First, how was Silphium actually used in Antiquity? Second, when and why did it disappear? Third, what actually could it have been botanically? And finally, why does it still matter to us today? So when I tell people that I'm a classics major, the most common question that I'm going to get is, so what does that actually mean? So I'm going to take a minute and just situate us when and where in the world we're going to be talking about. So the first references to Silphium that we get start from this region in the ancient Mediterranean, ancient Greece. And they start 600 years before the Common Era, or the year zero. They continue on from other Mediterranean superpowers like Rome and Egypt, among others, for the next 600 or 700 years. So now I'm sure you're probably asking, what in the world is this Silphium thing that you keep talking about? And the best answer that I can give you is that it was a multi-purpose wonder plant. When it's dried and ground, apparently it could have been used to season meat and vegetables. Its juice, its resin, and its leaves could have been used to treat inflammation, fever, and bloating, among other medical ailments. And apparently it could have been used as an aphrodisiac, a contraceptive, and an abortifacient, all in one. But despite this pretty wide range of applications, the actual growth of Silphium was apparently entirely confined to this very small region on the coast of North Africa. Today we'd call it Libya, but in the ancient world it was a kingdom called Cyrene. The exportation of Silphium became so central to the economy of this region that it appears on one side or another of nearly every single coin minted from this kingdom for over 600 years. And these are a couple of examples of those coins. You can get a sense of what incredible information these pieces can give us about what Silphium actually could have looked like to the ancients. And these pictures are actually mine. I took them at the British Museum last summer when I traveled to London on a very generous grant from Kilachand. So now I want to transition us to the crisis period, Silphium's disappearance. Prior to 100 BCE, the Cyrenaic government had very strict regulations about how much of Silphium's population could be grown, harvested, and sold in any given season. But then, at some point, in the last 100 years before the year zero, Cyrene comes under Roman provincial control. Foreign Roman governors are shipped down to North Africa, and they systematically chip away at those regulations that are in place so efficiently that we're told that by the reign of Emperor Nero, so approximately 54 CE, only a single stalk of Silphium has been found in Cyrene within their recent memory. So who's to blame for Silphium's sudden disappearance? Unfortunately, the answer here, we don't really know. Maybe it was some barbarian invaders that we know were in the region. Maybe it was those greedy Roman governors. Maybe it was the minor Mediterranean climactic shift that we know happened at around this region at around this time. But I say to you that whatever the precise mechanism was here, whether directly or indirectly, human beings are to blame for this. And we were so efficient in our destruction that to this day, we still do not know what Silphium actually was. But we do have a couple of guesses, based primarily on coins like these. And they show us that Silphium has this characteristic heart-shaped seed pod. This is actually characteristic of a modern plant family called the Apiaceae, to which carrot, celery, and fennel belong. And here you can see that some of these modern plant seeds, they look pretty similar to Silphium's, although Silphium's might be a little bit more idealized and iconographic. So from there, if you evaluate some of the medicinal properties and the growth patterns of Silphium, it seems a pretty likely member of the genus Ferula. And from there, we've got two major potential identifications, Ferula druidiana and Ferula tingitana. If you look at them on the board, you can see they look pretty similar morphologically. But Ferula druidiana has a very narrow growth range today. In fact, it's only been found in allegedly 3 small towns in the central region of Turkey, and there's no known evolutionary connection to North Africa. Ferula tingitana, however, has a much wider growth range across the Mediterranean, including this region that might look familiar to you. This is where Cyrene would have been in the ancient world. So I believe that Ferula tingitana is the most likely direct evolutionary relative of Silphium that we still have. But regardless of what it actually was, what lessons can it still give to us 2,000 years after it disappeared? And I think that there are 3 major takeaways from this. First, human beings have a very real capacity for and proclivity towards environmental destruction. Second, explicit and comprehensive conservation legislation works to stave off the extinction and destruction of native species. And finally, reductions in species protective measures directly contributes to extinction crises. As I wrap up here, I want to give you a quote from one of my favorite ancient Roman historians, Polybius. He tells us mankind has no better guide to conduct than the knowledge of the past. And indeed, the lessons and the failures of our ancestors to protect Silphium have been carefully preserved to us and handed down for centuries. And so I put to you that it is now remarkably important that we take the time to listen and to make sure that no other modern species experience Silphium's same tragic fate. Thank you so much again to Dr. Marston, to Kilachand Honors College, the British Museum, and of course to my friends and family who've listened to me talk endlessly about Silphium for the past few years. This project never could have happened without all of you. Thank you all so much for listening.
We will now be taking questions.
That was an awesome presentation. You're such a great speaker. I was wondering, what was your inspiration for choosing Silphium out of all the potential plants that have gone extinct?
I am so glad that you asked that question. It was actually entirely random how I happened upon Silphium. It was in a class that I took my sophomore year called Ancient Medicine in Ancient Greece and Rome with Dr. James Uden, who's a fantastic lecturer. And he, in one random lecture, just brought up Silphium for maybe 2 or 3 slides and said, here's what it did, here's what we know, and here's what we don't know. And then he moved on. And I was like, I want to know so much more about this. And so it just sort of sent me down this rabbit hole of looking up websites and then scientific papers and then articles and then ancient sources. And that's how I arrived at wanting to do a little bit more research and to really sink my claws into doing some contributions to the existing literature.
Thank you, Sydney. One thing that really surprises me about what you found is that I tend to think of sort of environmental protective legislation and trade deregulation both as like things we do in the modern world only, like things that started to happen in the 1970s. And you found these sources from Antiquity of sort of environmental legislation. Can you say a little bit more about like what those looked like or how common that sort of care for the environment was in your time period?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to answer you with the answer that I get all the time in my classes courses. We don't actually know. We unfortunately don't have any known sources from Cyrene itself about these conservation measures. We have them only from Greek sources and later Roman sources, who were probably using those primary sources that have since been lost to us. So that's a lot of the information that we have right now about other conservation measures that might have existed. They come from those other sources who are using the primary materials and adapting them and potentially inserting their own biases, maybe presenting them to us organically. But it's hard to say factually how many of them actually existed and what they could have actually looked like.
It was a really lovely talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of my favorite things about the symposium day is that I discover, like you did, these topics that I'd never heard of before and just think are absolutely fascinating. So thank you for that. I was wondering if you could just talk to us about what it was like to go to the British Museum and get to take those photos and just tell us some stories.
Oh, that's an incredible question too. It was surreal, honestly, to be able to have that experience. I actually got to bring my mom along with me, so the two of us spent a weekend in London, and I had basically 8 to 10 hours in an observation room in the back area of the coins and metal department in the British Museum. And for most of it, it was just me. And they gave me, I want to say, 6 to 7 trays worth of coins, so hundreds of coins, more than I had asked for, and just said, here you go. And I just had to put on my little gloves, and I got to hold them and take pictures of them and use the ruler and magnify on them. I have sketches from when I was in the actual room. And it was so crazy, because some of them are like smaller than my little pinky finger, and others of them are probably, about the size of a modern quarter. And to see that range and that transition from when we only have the seed pods as the coins that were used, and then we get these super, super ornate depictions of Cyrenaic coins with the Silphium, to see that progression in the material history and just like hold it in my hands was just incredible, surreal. It was an incredible opportunity.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, Sid.
It's
So we've talked about this extensively, and one of the things you bring up a lot, like you said, is that we don't actually know. So I'm wondering if there's any leeway in the future for us to understand, as a society, as historians, a little bit more about Silphium, and if we did get some new source, what that might look like.
Oh, fantastic question also. I'm actually really excited about this. So right now, the most leading potential avenue to actually find out what it actually could have been is underwater archaeology. It's extremely expensive, and it requires an extreme specialization in archaeology, but actually going on dives on the coast of North Africa to find shipwrecks where you can actually find amphorae and storage faces that might actually have some residue of Silphium, there's a distinct possibility that that might actually be preserved in those underwater environments. And if that is found, you can test that and find biologically, based on that residue, what it actually is, or at least what it actually is connected to in a modern plant species. So if that does happen, I think that's the most promising avenue to find out specifically what it was.
Let's give it up for Sydney.
Thank you so much, y'all.